Hello and welcome to Trust Your Glitter podcast. This is Christy and I am going to be talking about the astrology of January 29th through February the 4th. This is a week where there's not going to be a lot of transits on paper. There are a good amount of aspects between the planets, but the actual transit, the only transit we're experiencing this week, is the last quarter waning moon on February 2nd at 6:18 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at 13 degrees of Scorpio. Now, I'm also going to account for the fact that based on other lunar charts, 7 degrees of Scorpio is counted for. I'm using tropical astrology, but I'm also counting for other methods of reading astrology charts. So whether you're reading this as a 70-degree Scorpio last quarter moon or 13 degrees, I'm just going to take into account kind of a broader range of what this energy means and the symbolism that we're experiencing a Scorpio last quarter moon this week as we're in Imbolc, which is that midpoint celebration between winter and spring. So we have a very symbolic week, but we also have the fact that there's a lot more going on underneath the soil than there appears to be in present. So it can feel very slow this week. It can be especially if you're impatient or you're waiting on something or you want to experience a shift. This year with the North Node, especially in Aries, it's really all about waiting it out until March, and that is late March. So it really is a time to really appreciate the quarters, the semi-quarters, and really, I'm looking at 2024 in quarter processes and looking at the longer game. And it's really hard because society has not caught up to this. So when I was looking at kind of symbolism for this week ahead, I had something happen right before I recorded that was very frustrating. And it's kind of one of those things where it's not, have you ever had something where it's not about the shit that just happened, like spilling a whole pot of coffee or flooding a toilet over? It's really not about the thing. It's about all the other stuff that has happened in your past that has led up to the thing. And some people are really good at living in the present, being like, I spilled a whole pot of coffee, or I flooded the pipes, or things like that. But then there's people who react where your reaction really has nothing to do with the moment. And I was thinking about how this is what this week is kind of about. It's really about, again, we're in Aquarius season. It's about kind of a detached emotional perspective. Pluto's in Aquarius, which is about transformation on a generational basis, detaching ourselves from our genetic lineage, the expectations of our genetic lineage. At the same time, we're experiencing kind of an interseasonal recognition that, we're germinating. There's a ton of introspection that comes with this week. And because of that, it's not just some pop culture holiday of does the groundhog see its shadow or not? Ha 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 ha. It's about, think about the symbolism of that. The symbolism is have you danced with your shadow? And what more do you need to dance with that? And that means to look back. We got to look back at, October, November. We've got to look back at the fall and kind of ask ourselves, what were we learning during that time when those eclipses we're triggered. And as we're in this interim, in this space, in this portal, where the soil is taking us, how we're going to sprout in the spring. So the aspects of this week that are kind of giving us some data. On the 29th, we have Mars trine Uranus. Very nice. In Capricorn, 19 degrees. Now, we experienced last week the conjunction between Mercury and Mars in Capricorn. Capricorn's a slow grower, slow growing sign. If you have a Saturn ruled chart, for example, your life takes a long road, the hard, long road. So with Mars trine Uranus, this opening up the week, it's very nice. But in Earth signs, Uranus went direct on the 27th. So Uranus going direct is saying, okay, got some lessons regarding chaos. Honestly, chaos could be spilling a whole pot of coffee. And how do you react in that moment of like, I just lost, if I were to spill a whole pot of coffee, for example, here's how I react to it. I think about the farmer that grew the coffee beans. I think about how those coffee beans were brought to, imported, shipped, and brought, to where I am at, the grocery store, the person that put it on the shelves, the fact that, that took time. It went from a farm to a coffee pot where, a bad action on my part, which is an accident, absolutely, could cause something like that. So for me, spilling a pot of coffee is not just spilling a pot of coffee. It's thinking about the whole process that led to the loss. Is that a very broad example of all the other shit that's going on in the world? Absolutely. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in the world. And in fact, on a cultural level, on a socioeconomic level, on every level, we're seeing, actions, how they led to certain things, how they're cultivating certain things. And I think it's so important to note that Imbolc is the celebration of the goddess Bridget. And she is in many ways a goddess of peace. She's also a goddess of cultivating, fertility. But I think it's interesting because, her backstory is she came or was reflected upon during a time of war and came to the aid of those who were experiencing the great loss and how, different areas, different regions were torn apart during war. And even the loss of her own son. So it's interesting to me because I was thinking back many years ago when I was first doing readings in person. I was in Brooklyn, New York, and I was just kind of exploring, my career in stand-up, which is just, the open mic scene of New York City, and also, meeting people in coffee shops and doing readings and dog walking during the day and, every gig I could possibly take to just keep myself going towards these goals, but also teaching myself astrology and teaching myself how to do tarot. And around this time frame, the nodes were in between Leo and Aquarius. And I remember back to that time that I was getting a constant, readers go through these different sections of our lives. When you're a tarot card reader, psychic reader, channeler, however you want to put it, intuitive, where you get kind of a pattern. And the pattern I was getting was I was getting a lot of women who were going through miscarriages. And I was thinking about that as I was preparing for this podcast today, because we're in that season where we have the seeds that we are planting, the ideas for what we wanted for, say, this 2024 season or our lives in general. And sometimes when we go through shit, we have a miscarriage in our goals, our creative goals. And it doesn't mean that we're a failure. And I'm saying this from somebody who, as I'm looking at both my personal life, but I'm also seeing other people I'm reading for, and I'm seeing society, as I'm observing different patterns. I'm seeing this week as a symbolism of almost like we're in this intergenerational traffic jam where, whether you want to call this Age of Aquarius, whether you want to call this like just Pluto going through Aquarius, entering Aquarius again, however you want to translate this, and especially with the last quarter moon being in Scorpio, which, represents those pipes, like the deep underworld, but also Scorpio being a water sign does represent plumbers, does represent the swamps. So there is this sort of watery element this week, and there's a ton of fixed sign energy. So if you want to say there's a cosmic traffic jam or a cosmic clog in some sort of energetic pipes, I'd be interested to see what this week is bringing when it comes to weather or like weather-related results in the zeitgeist. Because looking at, the fact that Pluto's now in Aquarius, when we were working with the eclipses in the fall, Pluto was in Capricorn. So we're looking at this from a brand new perspective with the knowledge. We're bringing forward the knowledge we had. So it's almost like on a psychological level, you're reassessing things, but from a more mature perspective. You might have been stuck in like the emotional loops back in October and November, but now this is saying, well, you got the downloads. You danced with your shadow. But now this is like that in between of like, we're going to take the shadow into the light, but it's from February 1st, 2nd on towards March. So there's a shift this week. It's subtle. Some people might, if you're experiencing depression, if you're experiencing that feeling of like, I need to be away from people, if you're experiencing that feeling, it's legit. You're in, the depression part is look even deeper inward. It is a hibernation week. Based on the astrology, do I think the groundhog's going to see their shadow? Let's go into the aspects. So on the 30th, Mercury is semi-square Saturn. Also, the Sun is semi-square Neptune. Okay, so I think he's going to see a shadow. Because also on the 2nd, then we have Mars semi-square Saturn. And that is technically Groundhog Day. And then Mercury is sextile Neptune. And that's like mind over like the distortion. So I'm going to say, like, I don't know what the ground, like, you can't say what a groundhog's going to do, but I think we're going to have some more winter on the way. Maybe I'm wrong because, but astrologically, there is a Neptunian, Saturnic, Piscean element between the 30th and the 2nd. So I'm going to call it that we're going to have the groundhogs say there's more winter. Isn't it weird? What if we had like a cosmic groundhog? And really it was just Bridget the whole time, the goddess, but she was in the form of a cosmic groundhog. And then she was just like, hey guys, just to let you know, you have 6 more weeks of contending with your bullshit. Based on the astrology, we have 6 more weeks of contending. And also based on the fact that the North Node and South Node really wants us to go into the light. And I look at the South Node in Libra as a portal. So the portal goes up to fire. And then on the 3rd, we have Venus quintile Neptune. That is a creative aspect. So overall, if I'm looking at a broad stroke of the week, I'm going to say that this week gives us time to reflect. This week gives us time to look at ourselves, but also look at what brought us here. There's so many different resources that I looked at this week to prepare for the energy of the week. But one of the things that, I'm really deeply looking at is just videos about intergenerational healing. Because I think a lot of people are waking up at different rates depending on what our life assignments are. And, the rate that people are looking at what in the hell is going on, this week really asks us to rest. Society is still telling us that rest is wrong. And I think that a lot of people go through this dilemma when our body is literally screaming at us to rest, when our body is literally screaming at us to slow down, when we're experiencing burnout, because capitalism doesn't slow down. But what I see as this intergenerational clog is that some people on the time frame scale are ahead of their time. Some people are behind in time, but yet time is a construct where we're all really in time with one another. So it is revolutionary. I think I saw a friend post a meme, but it is revolutionary to stand up for yourself. It is revolutionary to say, yeah, this is too much for my body right now. It is revolutionary to say, you know what, maybe the ye old ways were good for a specific time frame and generation, when Pluto was here, when Uranus was here, when this was here. But now we're experiencing a massive shift. And I saw this interview with Lainey Wilson. She's a country artist. She is, I believe she's a Taurus Capricorn. And she's one of my favorite country artists. It's not even her music, which just is, her voice is so haunting to me. Like it's one of those, this pure country voice, but it's also her story. If you're not a country fan, whether or not you're a country fan, you got to have your head under a rock to not to see that there is a country movement that's been going on for the last few years, and I'm all about it because I really love country music. But Lainey's story is, here's this woman who moved to Nashville. She always knew that her home was Nashville. And I saw this interview because she comes from a family where her father is a farmer. And she says she approached her music just like that of a farmer, where she knew that certain seasons were highly fruitful. Obviously, this is a paraphrase of how she said it, but certain seasons are baller seasons. Sometimes you get all the crops, sometimes you get all the things, and then some seasons are really terrible, And for her, she was around Nashville before she even had a movement in her career for 10 to 12 years. She lived in her van outside of a recording studio and went from her van to the recording studio every day. And, when I listened to the interview, I was like, I'm going to cry, but the most spiritual job ever is that of a farmer or a gardener. It's not of a preacher or a pastor or a priest or somebody who's sitting on a pulpit, flapping their mouth towards us. And I'm not saying that for all priests or, preachers, but I'm just saying somebody who just literally goes out every day, takes care of the land, and, lets the land do her work. And I was thinking about that because, ultimately, my ultimate goal since I was young, and I'm kind of realizing this now, is to be a farmer. It was never to be, a famous comedian. It was never to be, in this weird world that I somehow got into. I don't even know that I would ever record a podcast or anything like that. But just to be among the plants and the animals and the land. And how that, at this time of our intergenerational traffic jam, our intergenerational pipe clog, is a revolutionary act. How that's become to be part of the land, to be one with nature, to wake up with the sun, to go to sleep when it gets dark, to homestead, to plant, to grow. How, for some reason, that's become the antithesis of what society has expected of us. We're seeing a movement, and it seems like it's a counter movement of going backwards, but really, is it? I was just thinking about how I wish I knew more about hay storage. I had a memory come up about, every summer brings its different hay seasons. And, certain cuts of hay are different. And, especially where I grew up with horses, it depended on different times of the season for different cuts of hay, but sometimes you get a really shitty cut of hay. And we had a really shitty cut of hay, but I would try and mix. I was the feeder. I fed morning and evening at a horse farm where I kept my horse. And I would try and mix the shitty hay with the good cut of hay because we were at it in between. And I remember opening up a bale and there was just a fresh, preserved snakeskin in the middle of it. And I never really ever thought about it. I just, threw that flake of hay away. But I wonder, I just wonder about that. I don't know how that reflects in. Maybe it's that Scorpio moon this week is like that. It's you open up a bale of hay and there's this preserved snakeskin. It's been shed. You've shed out of that skin, but that skin was left behind somewhere. And somewhere somebody has to dispose of that. Now, how I disposed of the snakeskin was like, I just put it in, on every horse farm, there is like a big poop pile. And I just put it there and I just let it do its thing. And I gave it back to nature. And I think that that's what it is. It's just being like, okay, this is my old self. I have to say goodbye to my old self. And Bridget, the goddess, Imbolc, the ritual is to just, if you don't have an altar, I don't have an altar. I'm doing all my altar digital. So if you're listening to this podcast, that is my digital altar. But it's like pine cones and just like nature. And giving that to her and saying, this is my old skin. And now we're going to shed. We've already shed it, actually. We've just been in this like underground phase. Did I think I was going to talk about the snakeskin I found in the really shitty cut of hay? No, I did not, but here we are. So I want to say, I hope that you have an amazing week ahead. I think, just based on the astrology I see, I don't think it's going to be like new news stories. I think it's going to be news stories that we've already seen appearing back into, the breaking news frame. But I think this week is going to be all about looking at life from what was once messy, and we can now look at it from a broader perspective with both enlightenment and knowledge of how to actually handle this as we are going to prepare to head into a new season. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please rate, review, like, subscribe to Trust Your Glitter. I'm on all platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Music. I think it's Audacity and more. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great week ahead.